The Young and the Restless spoilers shock. The crisp autumn air of Genoa City usually heralded the comfort of pumpkin spice at crimson lights and the anticipation of the holidays. But today, the atmosphere at the Chancellor Park Fall Festival felt brittle, like dried leaves ready to shatter. Adam Newman adjusted his scarf, his eyes scanning the crowd not for threats, but for his son. Connor stood near the pumpkin carving station, a small knife in his hand, hesitating. Chelsea Lawson stood beside Adam, her shoulder brushing his, a silent testament to the fragile truce they had built for their boy. "He's doing okay," Chelsea murmured, though her fingers were knotted together. "Dr. Alcott said exposure to crowds is good. Controlled environments." "He looks terrified, Chelsea," Adam replied, his voice low. Before Chelsea could counter, the air shifted. Connor dropped the carving tool. It clattered against the wooden table, the sound swallowed by the laughter of other children. But to Adam, it was a gunshot. He watched his son's gaze lock onto something or someone near the periphery of the park, where the shadows of the old oak trees stretched long and thin. A man stood there. He was dressed in a nondescript charcoal coat, the collar turned up against the wind. To the casual observer, he was just another attendee. But the way he stood still, predatory, watching sent a primal shiver through the crowd that only Connor seemed to tune into. The man's face was partially obscured, but for a split second, a shaft of sunlight cut through the leaves, illuminating a scar or perhaps just a rugged line of a jaw that felt ancient and malevolent. Connor screamed. It wasn't a cry of surprise, it was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror, a frequency that cut through the festival chatter instantly. Connor, Chelsea was moving before Adam could blink, rushing to the table where her son was now hyperventilating, clutching his chest. "The man," Connor gasped, his eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking out. "The bad man. He's here. He's really here." Adam spun around, searching the tree line. The spot where the figure had stood was empty. Only a few dry leaves swirled in the vacuum where the stranger had been. The transition from the festive park to the sterile silence of the ranch house was jarring. Night had fallen, but sleep was a stranger to the Newman-Lawson household. Connor thrashed in his bed, the sheets tangled around his legs like vines. "No, don't stop him," he whimpered, the words slurring into a moan of distress. Chelsea sat on the edge of the bed, wiping sweat from his forehead with a damp cloth. Her own face was pale, drawn with the exhaustion of a mother who feels her child's pain as her own. Adam stood in the doorway, a silhouette of helpless rage. "It's the OCD," Adam whispered, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "It's a new fixation." The crowd triggered a panic attack, and his mind created a monster to justify the fear. "I don't know, Adam," Chelsea replied softly, not looking up. "This feels specific. He's not counting. He's not checking locks. He's terrified of a person." Connor's eyes snapped open, wide and unseeing. "He has the eyes," the boy whispered, grabbing Chelsea's wrist with surprising strength. "Like a shark. Dead eyes." "Who, baby? Who has dead eyes?" Chelsea asked, her voice trembling. "The man from the park. He said he remembers." Connor squeezed his eyes shut again and drifted back into a fitful, whimpering sleep. Adam walked into the hallway, running a hand through his hair. He pulled out his phone, staring at the blank screen, the urge to burn down the world rising in his chest. He needed answers, not psychiatric theories. 2 days later, the obsession had manifested into ink and paper. The living room floor was covered in drawings. Connor sat in the center of the chaos, a black charcoal stick in his hand, moving with frantic intensity. Chelsea and Adam watched from the kitchen island, coffee mugs untouched. "Look at the detail," Chelsea said, her voice tight. She picked up one of the sketches. It wasn't the crude drawing of a child. It was a visceral, jagged portrait of a man. The shading around the eyes was heavy, giving the subject a hollow, skeletal look. But it was the jawline and the specific tilt of the head that made Chelsea's stomach turn. "It looks like a caricature," Adam said, leaning over. "But familiar. He's drawn the same face 20 times, Chelsea noted. "And look at the background in this one." She pointed to a sketch where the man was standing in front of a building with a distinctive arched window. "That's Crimson Lights," Adam realized. The old layout, before the remodel. "Why would Connor draw the old coffee house?" Chelsea asked, a chill creeping up her spine. "He barely remembers it looking like that." Connor looked up, his hands stained black with charcoal. He's waiting, the boy said, his voice flat, devoid of the panic from before. He's waiting for the blonde lady. The blonde lady. Adam knelt down. Mom? Connor shook his head. No. The other one. The sad one. Chelsea exchanged a look with Adam. Sharon. The suspicion that this was more than a childhood fantasy hardened into resolve. The drawings were too consistent, the details too specific to be random neural firing. Adam and Chelsea decided to bring the sketches to the one place that seemed to be the epicenter of Connor's nightmare, the coffee house. Sharon Newman was wiping down the counter when they walked in. The place was bustling, but Sharon looked tired, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Nick Newman was there too, leaning against the counter, talking to her in low tones. Adam, Chelsea, Nick greeted them, straightening up. Everything okay? How's Connor? That's actually why we're here, Adam said, skipping the pleasantries. He placed a folder on the counter. We need you to look at something. Chelsea opened the folder and spread the charcoal drawings on the granite surface. Connor has been having nightmares. He says he saw a man at the park. He's been drawing him nonstop. Sharon glanced down politely, but as her eyes focused on the sketches, the color drained from her face so fast it looked painful. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. Oh my God, she whispered. Nick looked at the drawings, his brow furrowing. This looks like Matt, Sharon choked out. It's Matt Clark. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Adam stared at her. Matt Clark. The guy who died years ago. He's not dead, Nick said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. We found out recently. He was living in LA under an alias, Mitch Bacall. But we thought he was gone again, that he'd fled the country. Connor saw him, Chelsea said, her voice rising. At the park. He said the man had dead eyes and was waiting for the sad blonde lady. Sharon let out a small, strangled sob. He's back. He's actually back in Genoa City. Why would Connor react like that? Adam demanded. Connor doesn't know who Matt Clark is. He wasn't even born when all that went down. Matt has a way of projecting fear, Sharon said, her voice trembling. If he looked at Connor, if he wanted to scare him, he's targeting the family, Nick said, his jaw tight. He knows Connor is your son, Adam. He knows the connections. He's not just lurking, he's hunting. The investigation began in the back room of Crimson Lights, away from prying eyes. The four of them, Adam, Chelsea, Nick, and Sharon, formed an unlikely council of war. We need to retrace the timeline, Adam said, pacing the small room. If he was at the park, he's getting bold. He's not hiding in the shadows anymore. He wants us to know he's here, Sharon said, wrapping her arms around herself. That's his game. Psychological torture before the physical act. He did it to me in high school. He did it when he came back as Carter Mills. Chelsea was looking through the drawings again. Look at this one, she said, pulling out a sketch they hadn't focused on. It showed the scary man holding a lighter, a small flame illuminating a stack of boxes. Fire, Nick said. He burned down the athletic club office back in the day. He likes fire. But what are these boxes? Chelsea squinted. They have a logo. Adam leaned in. That's the Newman Enterprises logo. But the old one? The one from the 90s. He's living in the past, Sharon realized. He's recreating his greatest hits. He wants to destroy everything we've built since he died. He's not just after Sharon, Adam said, a cold realization washing over him. He's after the legacy. He saw Connor at the park. Connor is the most vulnerable point in the Newman armor right now. If he wants to hurt the family, he starts with the weakest link. Chelsea slammed her hand on the table. He is not touching my son. We need to find him before he makes a move, Nick said. I'll call Victor. We need the security team on high alert. No, Adam countered. If we bring in the cavalry, he goes underground. We need to lure him out. We need to make him think he's winning. You want to use Connor as bait? Chelsea looked at him with horror. No, Adam said firmly. I want to use us. We make a public show of Connor being sent away for treatment again. We make it look like the family is falling apart. That's what he wants, right? To see us suffer. If he thinks he's succeeded in breaking Connor, he might get careless. It's risky, Nick said. It's the only way to stop a ghost, Adam replied. The plan was set into motion, but the atmosphere in the ranch house was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an intruder. Connor was kept in his room, ostensibly resting, but Chelsea stayed by his side, reading to him, trying to drown out the silence. Adam patrolled the perimeter of the property, his eyes scanning the darkness. Suddenly, the lights in the house flickered and died. Adam, Chelsea's voice drifted down the stairs, laced with panic. "Stay there," Adam yelled, pulling a flashlight from the drawer. He moved toward the circuit breaker box in the utility room. As he entered the room, the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness and landed on a figure standing by the panel. It was him, the man from the drawings, Matt Clark. He looked older, the years of plastic surgery and deception having settled into a mask of rigid cruelty. He held a pair of wire cutters in one hand and a small, silver lighter in the other. "Hello, rich boy's brother," Matt sneered, his voice raspy, like dry leaves dragging on pavement. "Matt Clark," Adam said, his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here." "I have a lot of unfinished business," Matt replied, flicking the lighter. The flame danced, casting long, distorting shadows on his face. "Your nephew Nick took everything from me. My freedom, my face, the woman I wanted. I thought it was time the Newmans felt what it's like to lose something precious." "You stayed away for 20 years, Adam said, edging closer. "Why now?" "Because I saw the boy," Matt said, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "At the park. He looked so fragile, just like Sharon used to be. It inspired me. Why kill you all when I can drive you mad? I can make that boy see monsters in every corner until he breaks completely." Adam lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was the explosive reaction of a father protecting his cub. He tackled Matt, slamming him against the breaker panel. The lighter flew from Matt's hand, skittering across the concrete floor. They grappled in the dark, a chaotic tangle of limbs and grunts. Matt was strong, fueled by decades of hate, but Adam was fighting for his son's sanity. Matt landed a solid punch to Adam's gut, doubling him over, but Adam grabbed Matt's coat and swung him around, throwing him into the shelving unit. "Chelsea, get the kids out," Adam roared. Upstairs, Chelsea heard the crash. She grabbed Connor, wrapping a blanket around him. "We have to go, honey. Now." "Is it the bad man?" Connor asked, his voice tiny. "Daddy is taking care of it," Chelsea said fiercely. Downstairs, the fight had spilled into the hallway. Matt had pulled a knife, same one he must have used to cut the wires. He slashed at Adam, catching his arm. Blood welled up, dark and warm. "You Newmans always think you can buy your way out of consequences," Matt spat, breathing hard. "But you can't buy safety." "I don't need to buy it," Adam grit out, clutching his bleeding arm. "I just need to end you." Just as Matt raised the knife for a killing blow, the front door burst open. Nick Newman stood there, a tire iron in his hand, Sharon right behind him with a flashlight blindingly bright. "Matt!" Nick yelled. The distraction was all Adam needed. He kicked Matt's knee, shattering the joint. Matt howled and collapsed. Nick was on him in a second, pinning him to the floor, the tire iron pressed against Matt's throat. "It's over, Matt," Nick said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "This time, you're not disappearing." Sharon stepped forward, the light illuminating the man who had haunted her for half her life. She looked down at him, not with fear, but with a cold, hard pity. "You're just a drawing," she said softly. "You're just a bad memory." Later, after the police had dragged a cursing Matt Clark away, and the paramedics had bandaged Adam's arm, the house was quiet again. Chelsea sat on the couch, Connor asleep in her lap. Adam sat opposite them, nursing a glass of whiskey, his good hand trembling slightly. Nick and Sharon had stayed, sitting in the armchairs, a silent vigil. "He drew him," Connor murmured in his sleep. "He drew the bad man away." Chelsea stroked her son's hair. She looked at Adam. The tension of their pasts, the betrayals and the hurts, seemed insignificant in the face of what they had just survived. "You fought for him," Chelsea said softly. "I'd burn the world down for him," Adam replied, his eyes meeting hers. "We have a lot to figure out," Nick said, breaking the silence. Matt had plans. Notes in his pockets about the ranch, about Newman Media. This wasn't a one-man job. He had resources. "Then we investigate," Adam said. Together. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. For the first time in a long time, the fractured pieces of the Newman clan felt aligned. The threat of Matt Clark had forced them into a phalanx, shields locked. Connor stirred, opening his eyes. He looked at Adam, then at the empty corner where the shadows used to be. "Is he gone?" Connor asked. "Yeah, buddy," Adam said, leaning forward to brush a thumb over his son's cheek. "He's gone, and he's never coming back." Connor closed his eyes and let out a long breath, the first deep, peaceful breath he had taken in days. The nightmare was over, but the dawn brought a new reality, one where Chelsea and Adam knew that the only way to survive the darkness was to stand in it together. It was difficult for anyone in Genoa City to fully understand the unsettling thread binding Matt and Connor, yet the more people tried to distance the two, the more their shadows seemed to overlap. As if some invisible current of instability pulled them together despite every warning sign. There was something haunting about the way Matt's presence lingered, something that suggested unfinished emotional debris buried in Chelsea's past. Something she had tried to forget but that resurfaced now with a force strong enough to disrupt the fragile balance of her current life. Chelsea had always believed she had outrun the ghosts of earlier years, but the mind never truly surrenders what once shaped it. And the name Matt had begun sliding back into her thoughts with an intrusive persistence, pulling old fears and buried guilt into her chest until she found herself wondering whether she had ever really escaped him at all. She could still remember the eyes that once held charm yet flickered with volatility. The contradictions wrapped inside a man who had promised protection yet had lived on the edge of spiraling into chaos. The same kind of chaos she now glimpsed in Connor when he withdrew into himself. When he paced restlessly like a trapped bird struggling to decode emotions too heavy for his young mind. It terrified her to sense that echo, to fear that the emotional instability she once tried to help Matt hide might now be reflected in her son. And that fear twisted inside her even before Matt's return made everything more dangerous and more painfully connected. Adam saw only fragments of this unspoken history. Enough to sense a quiet storm building inside Chelsea, but not enough to understand why even the mention of Matt's name now created a tremor under her breath. When Matt suddenly crashed back into their lives, a raw bundle of resentment and psychological fractures. Chelsea felt the past collide with the present so violently that it knocked the air out of her. She had once cared for him, once tried to mend wounds in him she barely understood, but instead of healing, he had morphed into a man shaped by uncontrolled impulses. A man whose anger could ignite like dry wood catching flame. That anger now seemed to fixate on Connor, as if the boy's mere existence triggered something primitive and unresolved inside Matt. Something that made him lash out with a fury so startling that even Adam, usually braced for confrontation, momentarily froze in disbelief. Matt's voice had risen without warning, slicing through the room like a weapon, calling Connor's name with an intensity that rattled the walls and shattered the illusion that he had come back merely to talk or reclaim some dignity he believed was stolen from him. Instead, he revealed a kind of obsession, a single-minded conviction that Connor carried something he wanted, something he believed belonged to him, yet no one knew what that something was or why it pushed him into a fevered rage. Connor had already been carrying a secret heavy enough to warp the quiet around him. He had been withdrawing, avoiding questions, staring for too long at locked doors and shadowed corners, reacting sharply whenever someone mentioned Matt as if the name itself triggered a memory he refused to release. He trembled each night from nightmares he would not describe, waking with his hands clenched and breath uneven, insisting he was fine even though fine was the last word anyone would use for the hollow look behind his eyes. And when Matt erupted, when he shouted Connor's name as if summoning a truth only the child could confirm, the boy's composure cracked wide open, fear rushing out of him in a tremor that made him stumble backward into Adam, who instantly wrapped protective arms around him. Chelsea collapsed at their side, pulling Connor close enough to shield him with her entire body, every instinct in her rising to confront the monster she thought she had abandoned years ago. The fury in Matt's expression fueled an atmosphere poisoned with old betrayal, suppressed guilt, and a chilling suspicion that something important had happened between Matt and Connor long before this moment, something only Connor remembered. Something he had hidden from his parents because even he didn't know how to explain it. Adam and Chelsea looked at each other, silently pleading for answers, feeling the weight of a secret Connor seemed determined to bury. The boy's trembling wasn't just fear of Matt's anger, it was fear of exposure, of being forced to reveal something he believed would shatter the trust between him and his parents. And in that moment, Chelsea felt everything collapse inward. The past she thought she had buried was now demanding to be reckoned with. the fragile emotional ground beneath her child cracking under the strain of whatever he had endured. She wondered whether Matt had manipulated Connor in some delicate way, planting ideas, planting fear, planting guilt, or whether Connor had witnessed something about Matt. Something so dark the boy struggled to process it. The human mind was not built for secrets this heavy, certainly not the mind of a child, yet Connor clung to his silence with a stubbornness that bordered on desperation, as if speaking the truth would unleash consequences he wasn't ready to face. The atmosphere curled inward, thick with tension, as Adam's protective instincts surged, and Chelsea's unresolved history with Matt pressed painfully against her ribs, whispering that this confrontation was not merely an accident, it was the inevitable collision of past trauma and present vulnerability. The question tore through the room, unspoken but deafening. What is Connor hiding? Because children do not tremble like that from ordinary mistakes, nor do they carry that haunted weight without reason. And Chelsea, deeply intuitive and painfully aware of the damage unstable men can inflict, felt a dread forming inside her. A dread that Connor's secret was tied not only to Matt's sudden return but to something darker. Something twisted inside Matt that had reached for her son the way it once reached for her, quiet at first, then possessive, then explosive. She feared that maybe Connor had seen the real Matt, not the man Chelsea once tried to believe in, and had kept that truth buried to protect himself or perhaps even to protect her. Meanwhile, Matt's rage suggested he believed Connor held a piece of him, perhaps a memory, a confession, or something Matt needed to reclaim control of his fractured identity. It was as if the unstable lines of their lives had begun to overlap long before anyone noticed, forming a psychological knot pulling tighter by the minute. In the suffocating silence that followed the outburst, when Matt's breath came in heavy, and even bursts, and Adam's hands tightened around Connor, Chelsea realized that the truth, whatever it was, would not stay buried much longer. Secrets always claw their way back to the surface. The only question now was whether Connor would find the strength to speak before Matt's instability dragged all of them into a deeper, more dangerous spiral. The boy's eyes shifted between Adam and Chelsea, filled with fear, guilt, and something else, something close to dread, as if he knew that revealing the truth would change everything. The echo of Matt's scream still vibrated in his bones, urging him to stay silent, yet his parents' arms around him told him he wasn't alone. But the secret remained locked behind trembling lips, the key held by a child who feared that unlocking it would unleash a storm no one could survive. So what was Connor hiding? Why did Matt's presence ignite terror instead of confusion? And why did Chelsea feel the chilling recognition that whatever haunted Matt now threatened to swallow her son too? The answers hung in the air, unspoken but dangerously alive, as Connor clung to his silence, knowing the moment he spoke, the lives of everyone in that room would never be the same.